Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories Podcast, the show for those of us sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin, I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, The Adventuress, we'll be hearing about a woman who we shouldn't be talking about, except we hear all about her criminal activities and extravagant lifestyle. And we'll be trying to find the correct John Wilshaw in Staffordshire, England. So, put down that old telephone directory, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guest. My guest today is a professional genealogist who has enhanced her research skills through extensive studies. She is also a specialist in adoption research, helping to locate and reunite birth and adoptive families, and through this has supported the work of NORCAP, PAC UK, Barnardo's and others. Somehow, amongst that busy schedule, she has found time to join us here too. So it's a pleasure to welcome my guest, Cathy Wilshaw. Hello, Cathy. Welcome to the Family Histories Podcast.
Well, hello, Andrew, and thank you so much for asking me to be on here today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming along. Now, we always like to start with the same question, which is, what was it that got you interested in researching your family history?
Well, to be honest, it was adoption that started me in family history.
Okay.
Because in the era that I was adopted, which was in the 60s, the prevailing advice that was given from social workers to adoptive parents was to make sure that your child always knew they'd been adopted, so it was not a secret.
Right.
As an adopted person, you weren't allowed to know your origins at the time, who your birth family was. You were supposed to know that you had not been born into this particular family.
Okay.
And that's what my parents did. They made sure that it was part of the conversation all the time. So there is never a time that I can remember that I did not know that I was adopted.
So there was no big surprise moment for you where you discovered it?
No, I want to say I'm very lucky. I am very lucky because over the course of my career, as we may discover later on, I've met a lot of other adopted people, and some did not know until they were much older. There's a small number that only found out when their adoptive parents died and they were going through their records that were left.
Oh, gosh.
And that's when they found out. And that's life-changing, absolutely life-changing for them. You can't underestimate the impact. But I knew from when I knew anything, I knew that I was adopted. So family trees were actually really quite important to me. It was something I was trying to understand. And I think it was probably about when I was 11 or 12. So this was 1970-something. I started to draw out family trees, and I was trying to understand not so much my biological family, because that wasn't a thing that I was allowed to know anyway, but how I was related to all the people that came in and out of our lives, because I had an enormous number of aunties.
Okay.
Who it turns out weren't actually aunties. I believe that probably, in a lot of cultures, you have aunties who aren't related to you as aunties, but that's a respectful term. So I had a lot of aunties through the church because my parents were very religious and I was brought up in the church. So we had a lot of aunties. And I wanted to understand how people fitted together. So I was often asking questions of my parents, how this all worked, and drawing out trees to try and understand it.
Okay.
And I loved going over old photographs. I loved it when people came around with old photographs, old sepia photographs, and this is great granny and this is, Grandma Faith or whatever, and I thought this was fabulous.
Yeah.
But in those days, of course, there was nothing really open to me to do other than ask the family. A brilliant starting point, and it's the starting point we would recommend today, that you speak to the family. But in those days, then what? I was quite lucky. I grew up in London, and my first job was in London. So when I was old enough to go to work, when I was in my 20s after university, I started going to St Catherine's House, which was where before the Family Records Centre, it's where the births, marriages and deaths indexes were. And I'm sure you know this, or you've heard about this. They were in massive volumes, massive ledgers for each quarter of each part of the alphabet, and you'd haul these massive volumes off the shelves. It was really good upper body workout, really good. But you'd only be able to go when you got time to go. So you couldn't sit and just open your laptop and spend 5 minutes doing something. It had to be a planned session where you knew what you were going to go and look for, and you had to hope that you weren't stood behind somebody else that was also searching the Smith surnames. Because I can't tell you the number of times where, because my maiden name's Watson, and Watson's not a Smith, but it's not far removed from that. And so if I was searching Watsons, I'd find myself behind somebody else who was searching Watkinson, and you'd have to wait for them before you could get to the volume that you wanted. But I loved it, absolutely loved it. So that was my early days in family history.
Wow. So beyond using the records there, what other kind of records were you using in your research?
Well, again, in common with older genealogists, the highlight of my holidays was walking around a graveyard. Oh, it's wonderful. Just wonderful. I don't know why more people don't do it as the feature, the main feature on their holiday. It's very strange. I walk around many a graveyard looking for family connections, names that I recognise, and that I've solved problems, solved unknowns before by going round graveyards. And I'd spend time, I've spent time going, sort of walking the steps that our ancestors took, looking for clues. But in those days, as I say, this is sort of in the 70s and then the 80s, there was a lot out there, but you had to go looking for it. You had to actually go to a record office or go to St Catherine's House or...
Yeah, physical locations.
Yeah, physically being there. And I actually think, to be fair, I don't think much matches that. I think people miss out on so much by not needing to do that anymore. I think you should, be good to want to do that, because I don't think you can beat that feeling of standing outside a church or inside a church and thinking, oh my God, that's where they got married, or that's where my, great-great-granddad was christened. There's something I find quite grounding about that. There's something that really is, it sort of connects you, I think, to your family history when you do that.
Yeah, very much so. So you've obviously become a professional genealogist, but you've also done a whole load of academic study that kind of leans towards that. Did you think that was like an essential foundation to becoming a professional researcher?
I'm a believer in lifelong learning.
Okay.
So I'm 63 now, and at 62, I passed my dissertation, my postgraduate dissertation with Strathclyde.
Congratulations.
And the only reason I've stopped is because I didn't have time to carry on. But if business sort of eases up a little bit, I'll be back in do a master's, because I love it. I mean, I love it, but I think it's so important. Again, if you look at what I've just said about feeling grounded and connected by visiting the places, I think it's so important to understand the records that are out there, because not many records were created with a view to us coming along in the 21st century and trying to use them to build a family tree.
Well, I wish that they had done.
Exactly. If only they did, we wouldn't have brick walls. It'd be brilliant. But actually, then it wouldn't be a very exciting hobby, would it?
No, that's true.
If somebody's already done it and there's the answer, click this link and there it is, then, well, okay, I'll go and read a book. But I do think it's important to keep learning, because there's always something more to learn. And I apologise now for older clients, past clients. I thought I used to write a really good research report for clients, until I did the Strathclyde course. And that just changed my approach. I mean, I wasn't writing bad reports, but my goodness, the structure of it, I realised I could still learn. So as I say, I don't think you're ever too old to learn something.
Yeah.
And it might be you're learning about a new source you didn't know about. You might discover, as part of my dissertation, I discovered that I was living in Sheffield at the time, and I discovered in the Sheffield Archives that there was a whole stack of information, a whole load of ledgers and documents about a place which was a home for friendless women and girls.
Friendless?
Friendless,
okay.
Which was their polite way of saying, if we don't remove them from their families, or they might already be removed from their families, we think they're going to become prostitutes. That's basically the very Victorian approach to how are we going to handle these girls? And it's brilliant. We just put them in domestic service because there's so many people need domestic servants. And what else are these girls going to do with no education, no family, no support, not married? So they put them into domestic service. And it was fascinating because there were so many admission registers. There were so many comments about what the girls got up to. And I was able to investigate their lives for my dissertation. But if I hadn't been studying, I probably never have known about that refuge at all. And equally wouldn't have known about the network of refuges around the country. They weren't actually connected in any sort of formal way. But all the matrons and all the well-meaning subscribers who were trying to support this place, they knew there were links. They knew about these other places, and they might send girls elsewhere to get them away from what they felt were negative influences from their family or friends locally, and equally take in girls who were at risk of falling into some sort of criminal life if they stayed wherever they were. Yeah. And so learning, being given a structured course, being taught about other sources, means that it continually opens up new worlds to me, and I absolutely love it. And I hope that there never comes a time that I can't keep learning.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've certainly never heard of those records before either, but I'm now intrigued as to what other kinds of sources and documents I could find for some of my ancestors as well. So now you're an adoption researcher, and I'm going to have a guess that that's incredibly difficult to do and immensely emotional, and at the same time could be potentially hugely satisfying as well. Why did you go into looking into other people's adoption cases?
I never wanted to.
Okay.
I wanted to just be a genealogist. And if you speak, as you do, to many genealogists, you'll find that they don't want to trace living people. Much prefer the dead, because the dead leave records and they're much easier to pursue, and you haven't got to worry about data protection and all sorts, privacy and confidentiality and people's feelings nearly as much as you do when you're dealing with living people. So I didn't want to do that. But in the 90s, I was living in Oxfordshire, and I used a charity called NORCAP, which was a support charity for adopted adults. They helped me make contact with my birth family. They used an intermediary. Okay. And I decided to, because they were based in Oxfordshire, that I would then go and volunteer in their offices. And I went in and I volunteered just as admin, filing, helping do things, answer the phone occasionally, send things, stuff envelopes, that sort of thing. But they had a search room. And in that search room, they had microfiche readers, and they'd got birth, marriage and death indexes, and they'd got multiple telephone directories, they got trade direct, all the sorts of things that before the internet you needed to try and trace somebody.
Yeah, essential tools, yeah.
Absolutely essential tools, electoral registers, that kind of thing. And in that search room, they had somebody that was available to help people who came in to do their own search. So that was the point, that members of the charity could come in and do their own search to try and trace their birth parent or whatever, because the law changed in the mid-70s to allow adopted adults to access their records and then search for whoever it was, birth mother, birth father. And around about that same time, the person who was helping out at the search room left. And they said, "Oh, you're a genealogist. That means you know what to do. Can you come in and run the search room?" And
wow.
So I did. And it's one of those, the rest is history. They then started using me to do what we used to call non-disclosure cases. This is where, again, the law changed and birth relatives were allowed to trace adopted adults. Well, they weren't allowed to do the trace. They were allowed for us to do the trace, to locate the adoptive adult, to say, your birth parent is looking for you, would you like contact? And then they get to say yes or no. And that's still the case today. And I would do those searches. And then eventually other agencies heard about me, and the rest really is history. I just sort of fell into it, really, because I'm adopted, because I was volunteering, and because I was interested in family history. It all came together.
Yeah, and I guess now with the surge in commercial genealogy DNA testing services, this is, I guess, kind of changed up quite a lot and probably leads people to some really unsuspected results. Do you think that these DNA testing services, and I'm not mentioning any here particular, are providing enough support for those who get results that go against what they're expecting?
I mean, the quick and simple answer is no. I believe there are disclaimers now, or sort of little notes to say, in the small print, you might find something that you weren't expecting. But that's not really any help, because who does that?
No, that's like a legal protection for them, sort of.
No, that's it. It's as much as they have to do, and no more.
Yeah.
I work as an intermediary as well, which means that not only do I do the tracing, but I then make contact and support both parties to see whether they do want contact, and then through it and afterwards. Yeah. And it is not an easy thing for anybody. Even the person who's come to me and said, can you please do this search, because I would like contact with my biological family member. We, as intermediaries, we spend a long time, what we call it, preparing them. So we run through all sorts of scenarios and questions and try and get them to think round what might happen and how they might feel about different outcomes, because it isn't long lost families. Occasionally it is, but rarely it is. There's a huge spectrum of outcomes. And everybody says to me, I'll be fine. And I can tell you that very few are. It's so much more than they ever expected it to be. And that's even with a positive outcome. If it's a negative outcome, people are not expecting it, however much they tell you they were, they're not. And I think that goes back to DNA, because people are not expecting. They do a DNA test, it might have been a gift.
Yeah. And
they do a DNA test kind of not really expecting anything other than to see, yes, I'm apparently completely Northwestern European, 98%, and look, there's my mother's family, and look, there's my father's family, exactly as I was expecting, and then something somewhere isn't quite right. There's no support for that, and sadly there's no support outside of adoption. There's no such thing as an intermediary like me outside of adoption. So if you get an unexpected result with your DNA test, you can't come to somebody like me, because there isn't somebody like me. I mean, I'd like to think one day there will be, but it took adoption 50 years to get to where we are today. It took 50 years to get access to records, and it's taken another 50 years to just about to regulate intermediary services. So I don't expect a quick answer for DNA. I always say when I talk about it with DNA, it's a double-edged sword, because it can answer questions that we couldn't answer before, because a lot of adoption records, certainly from my day, birth father either wasn't named or it was very vague. He was a builder and he was in his 20s and he lived in Liverpool. Yes. Seriously. And, I can't actually find that person. With the best will in the world, I don't know who they are. But DNA offers you the chance that we might be able to identify who he actually was. But equally, I mean, even with adopted people who sort of don't have any expectations when they go into DNA, you can uncover things. So I've had people come to me who the man that was named in their records actually biologically isn't their father. In my own biological family, I won't go into any details, but there's a fairly close relative who, in my direct line, whose father isn't who they think it is. And that's what my DNA test told me. So it's double-edged. It can answer questions, but it can also bring up so much emotion and, uncover lies and secrets. It's double-edged.
Is there anything that you would like to see improve within our genealogy community or genealogy industry then?
Going back to what I was talking about and what we were talking about with lifelong learning and walking around graveyards, I would love it if people could be helped in some way to see that there's more to genealogy and there's more to family history than just clicking on a hint and building your tree in an afternoon, because I think people miss out on so much by just sitting at the computer and having a genealogical website basically tell them this is who we think your family is, because chances are it isn't, for a start. But also, if you don't know the richness of the records that you're missing out on. I mean, we haven't talked about settlement records, which is one of my favourite records in the whole wide world. Settlement, if you find a settlement exam in the parish records. You can blast through a brick wall about where your family came from. There aren't many, but when you do, they're just gold. They're wonderful. But I wonder how many newcomers to family history and genealogy would even know what settlement was. And I would love it if there was some way of saying to people, in the same way as you can't drive a car till you've learnt to drive and taken a test. I don't need you to take a test because I don't like doing exams. So I have no problem with that. But I'd love it if there was some sort of basic skill. Right now, we'll let you loose on the website after you've done these basic skills.
Well, there's something to think about. And for someone who has gone through quite a lot of academic study to say that you don't like a test, that seems a little bit weird.
I don't. No, it's true, though. I did the IHGS course first. I mean, I started it in the 90s, and then I had to go back to work and get a proper job because my husband was made redundant. So I gave up all of that. And then I redid it all just before lockdown, I think it was. And as soon as I finished the course, and I did really well on all my coursework, but then there's an exam to actually say you've done it, and I did not want to do an exam, so I never finished the course from that point of view. Instead, I went to Strathclyde because it's a dissertation.
Oh, I see.
So I don't do exams anymore. I'm done with those. Thank you very much.
I think you'd pass that level on these family history genealogy websites if there was an exam. I think you'd breeze straight past that. So
thank you.
I think you'd be all right.
Thank you for saying very kind.
Ooh, time for a little advert break. If you are interested in learning more about family history research, why not take an online course? Pharos Tutors offers short online courses on a variety of family and local history topics. Whether you want to learn more about how to do your research, have a yearning to learn more about manorial records, or are interested in a formal certificate programme. With over 50 courses ranging from beginners to advanced, there is something for everyone. Why not take a look at the course list today and plan something for the new year? Visit www.pharostutors.com. If you go searching deep enough, I bet that you can find some incredible stories in your own family tree. They might be wonderful, but they could also be dark and horrible too. And sadly, that's life. But it's important to find those stories to truly understand our relatives. And with that in mind, it's time for my guest to pick one of their relatives they've researched and then share their life story. Right, Kathy, who are you going to introduce us to?
I'd like you to meet Auntie Ivy.
Okay.
Now, Auntie Ivy is actually my great auntie Ivy, so relatively close in generational terms. She is deceased now, so she passed away. It was less than 100 years ago, but it was 85 years ago she passed away. And I did debate whether to introduce you to Auntie Ivy because she's relatively close, but her family, her generation has all passed. And in fact, as far as I know, there's nobody in my family left who ever knew her because she died before I and my cousins were born. So I don't think this is too much of a problem. And she led quite an interesting life.
This sounds juicy already.
Right. But let me tell you about Ivy. Ivy Collison. So this is my mother's side of the family. Ivy Collison, she was born in 1893 in Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
And she was the daughter of John Collison, who was a coal merchant at the time, and Mary Ann Briggs. They were married, that's her maiden name. And Ivy was the youngest of 9 children. They didn't stay they were in in Northamptonshire. They didn't stay there for long. They moved to Woolwich, and by 1901, on the census, Ivy was living at home. She was 8 years old and she was at school. Her father was now working. He'd gone from coal merchant to grocer and shopkeeper and sub-postmaster. So I feel that was a fairly good income job, that I would think very responsible.
Steady job, yeah.
Yeah. 10 years later, 1911 census, Ivy was still at home. She was 18 by now, and she was still with her parents and one older sister. John, her father, was still a grocer, and he had his own shop, and Ivy was not working at all. Her father died in 1916.
Okay.
And on the next census, 1921, Ivy was living with her widowed mother and 3 older sisters. At this point, she's now working as a children's nurse. 1931, she got married. So she was, 38 at this point. And she got married in Wellingborough to a gentleman called William Joseph Buckley, who was a leather dresser. And in 1939, she was randomly in Southampton, appearing as a widow at this point, and according to the 1939 register, she was working as an assistant cook at what turned out to have been a sick bay for evacuated children. So this is obviously very early war years. And at the moment, there's no evidence of anything unusual going on in Ivy's life. If you just look at public records, I mean, this is a fairly uneventful life.
Yeah, okay.
However, she died the following year. She died in 1940. And when she died, I got hold of her. I'd not really done much about Ivy until lockdown, because uneventful life, nobody had talked about her in the family. Not strictly true. My mother had said, we don't talk about Ivy, so don't ask. So I didn't.
That's...
I know.
Oh,
But when I started, as I said earlier, when I started, there was nothing else I could have done about it. There was nowhere for me to go and find out. Nobody wanted to talk about her, so
no.
That was a dead end. There's nothing I could do. And they said, oh, she died a long time ago, and that was it. Well, she did die in 1940, and I got her death certificate during lockdown. And the death certificate showed she died. I mean, it's quite a tragic accident. She'd caught fire. She'd been standing over an open gas oven, and she was with somebody else. There was nothing suspicious. Her apron caught fire. She panicked, and then she died a couple of weeks later from sort of septic shock. So nothing unusual. However, on her death certificate, it gave her name as Ivy Collison, or Ivy Buckler, or Ivy Briggs, or Irene Butler.
Well, that's quite a range.
Right, colour me surprised. That was really interesting. That, because that sort of, what did that mean? Well, we knew Ivy Collison. I knew Ivy Buckler because she'd been married.
Yeah.
Ivy Briggs. That Briggs was her mother's maiden name, so I wasn't sure about that. And Irene Butler, totally new. Didn't know what that was all about. But there was an inquest because of what had happened to her. And even though I didn't get hold of the inquest records, which I might not have been able to because this was 1940, so it's less than 100 years ago, don't know whether I'd have been allowed it, I turned at this point to newspapers. And this is how I filled in Ivy's life. And what a life.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
So I looked at the inquest, because certainly newspapers of the time did love to report things like inquests, fascinating stuff. And her inquest was reported, and her not so dead husband appeared. So she wasn't a widow.
Oh, okay.
He appeared, having identified her body, and said, yes, we're legally separated and I haven't seen her for 7 or 8 years, but this is her. The various names were aliases that my digging around in newspapers turned out that Ivy was how can we describe her? She was a con artist.
Oh.
She was a fraudster. And she spent all the intervening years, from what I found so far, conning men and people out of money and goods.
Wow.
And she went to prison several times for this. So I wanted to give you some of the examples of the things that she had done, because she was quite colourful character, as it turns out.
I'll stay right here because I'm going to enjoy saying it. Listeners, don't try this at home.
Oh, absolutely. Because we're laughing now, but just, again, as a slight aside, I can't help feeling for the victims in this. So it's faintly amusing, but then you think people were actually conned out of all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway. So she started off by taking in a baby that belonged to somebody else. And this was not illegal, what she did. This was sort of baby farming. So if you had a baby and you wanted to go to work, or you couldn't afford to keep it, you could give it away to somebody for, quote, adoption, unquote, or fostering, and for a fee. So you would give the baby with a fee, and some other lady would then look after it. Well, Ivy, for some reason, before she even got married, this was 1919, so she was only in her 20s, thought, I'll have a go at that. So she took this baby for £5 and then decided she didn't really like it anymore and gave it back. to a third party, and this poor baby died.
Ooh.
I know, not good. Ivy actually, turns out, had nothing to do with that, but she didn't come out of the inquest very well. You know, what she did was not illegal, but not very helpful. And this was the start, as far as I can see, of her various personas, because at this point she wasn't calling herself Ivy Collison until the inquest, where they found out who she was. She was calling herself Mrs. Parker, saying I think she said she was married to an officer in the Royal Horse Artillery. That's who she was married to. It absolutely wasn't true. And then I lose sight of her until 1927, when she was charged with obtaining goods by false pretences, now in Plumstead. So the act with the baby was in Woolwich. She's now in Plumstead, where she lived, and obtained goods by false pretences. She was placed on remand while they investigated other charges against her.
Okay.
And according to the newspaper, there'd been a previous conviction, which I haven't yet found. But the article, and this is something else I want the listeners to hold on to, right? The article ends by saying, quote, "The woman had since had an operation to her head."
Right.
Just hold on to that. I'm not going to talk about that just at the moment, but hold on to that thought, please. Okay, so Ivy's mother then died the following year. So Ivy is now an adult orphan, if you like, and she's still unmarried. Most of her siblings were married or working. And in 1929, she was charged with obtaining money by false pretences in and around London. So various locations in and around London. And at that point, she said, "My people ought to keep me, but they let me down," which I'm puzzling over, because I don't know who her people were supposed to be at that point.
Yeah, that's strange.
Isn't it? But there's a bit more I'll tell you. Anyway, in 1931, so 2 years later, she advertised for a wealthy husband. And she got one.
Well done her.
I know, well done her. She's going to come back to that as well. But she married William Buckler in Wellingborough that year. He was a widower, and he was 13 years older than her. And again, this turns out to be quite a thing. But she then proceeded to take all of his money. She opened a draper's business in Kettering, but exactly the following year, she was declared bankrupt because of, quote, "bad trade and ill health," again, with massive debts.
Oh.
The following year, 1933, she is back in the papers, this time in Sussex, having obtained money by false pretences. There is a bit of a thread here, isn't there? And we learn a little bit more about her character at this point, because this was a good story. She was said to have been dismissed from a Church Army hostel through incurring debts. The Church Army called her a plausible and inveterate liar who used religion to cover her offences.
Oh dear.
The irony of this is that her, and this is why I don't think my family wanted to talk about, her in-laws, so this is my mum's family rather than my mum's dad's family. So her in-laws were very, very, very religious, non-conformists. And one of her brothers-in-law was, in fact, the president of the Baptist Union at some point, and he also went on to attend the Queen's coronation in that capacity. So they were, and there was a sister who was a missionary. So there's lots of, you could see why they really didn't want to talk about it.
Yes, yeah, that wasn't very popular.
Exactly. And again, the newspapers tell us that she had had a serious brain operation. And she was sentenced to 6 months hard labour. Then there's more and more instances of Ivy Collison and now Ivy Buckler, so both names, being accused and found guilty of obtaining money by false pretences. Sometimes she was sent to prison, sometimes she had hard labour. And this was all around the place. So in 1934, she was sentenced in Windsor on 4 counts of fraud. And at that point, she asked for 13 more instances to be taken into consideration.
Oh my goodness.
Those aren't detailed, but 13 more. And then she appears in a national Sunday newspaper, The People. And it's a brilliant article. The headline is "The Queen of Adventuresses." And it went on to say she lived a luxury life after leaving the husband she ruined. And this is where they described her as dark and beautiful, a pretty little shopkeeper living a dull and unexciting life, wanting a chance to enjoy the luxury and glitter which she craved. She bought cars, smart clothes, beautiful gowns. She purchased property. She lived in the best hotels and dined at exclusive restaurants. And she did all of that with nothing.
I'm just thinking now, do you think she would have loved to have been on the TV show The Traitors, or do you think she'd have liked to have been on I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, or something like that?
That's such a good question. That's a really good question. Because if you keep going with these, she advertised for cooks, pretending to be somebody called Mrs. Buckle of Hyde Park Gardens, and she'd say, I recommend so-and-so for work, a non-existent person, include fake references and say, just send me the train fare and I'll send this person to you. And of course, she just took the money and there was no way of finding her because there was no Mrs. Buckle of Hyde Park Garden. So whatever she would have wanted to do, I don't know that she wanted to be noticed. She wanted to be noticed as a very rich person.
Okay.
But whether she wanted to be seen as a traitor, I don't know. She would have been good though, wouldn't she?
So she kind of wanted to have the status and the class and the style. She wanted that kind of life, but
yes,
she couldn't access it without the deception.
Correct. So she used to say that she was the daughter of a colonel and or married to a major. She tried to con another man into marrying her, saying that she was widowed, and he was in his 70s. But he actually, I was going to say escaped, but that went to court. He worked out that he was being conned before it went as far as anything else. And she conned him out of a lot of money. But again, there's a couple of things I just want to quickly say about her as well, because I find them they're just amazing. One of the courts, there was a police court where she was being remanded into custody. This was in Kent this time. It was held in hospital.
Right.
Where she was, because she had collapsed after they'd arrested her. So the magistrates and the police went to the hospital to remand her into custody. And they found her with her head bandaged. And again, no further information. And it's going on. She had said she at this point she had 2 cafes that she got the lease on. No money, but she'd got these 2 cafes that she got the lease on, and she said, all my debts will be covered by the profits from these cafes, don't worry. And they said that the profits, the daily sales, totaled 2 pence worth of buns. So they didn't think that was going to cover all her debts.
Might take a while to pay that off.
Exactly. And the other thing I just wanted to say about her, which I found really, really fun, and again, it provides this character, that twice in these descriptions, she had dogs with her. Once she had this Great Dane. When she was meeting the second potential husband, she emerged from a car that she didn't own with a Great Dane that she presumably also didn't own. And another time, when she was wandering around Plymouth in luxury cars, she had a chauffeured car.
Wow.
Again, she couldn't afford it, but she had a chauffeured car. So she had a liveried chauffeur driving her around, and she was dressed in furs. And she had 2 Pekingese dogs. She used to wander around with those. And again, no idea whether they were anything to do with her or not. But several times through these newspaper reports, it mentions hospitals, it mentions treatment, it mentions brain operations or head operations. And there's part of me that does wonder if perhaps, and this is the part of me that wants everything to be okay, was perhaps she wasn't well.
Yeah.
And the one aunt that I managed to tell me something, I interviewed her years and years ago. This is my mum's older sister, and I interviewed her. She had met Auntie Ivy, but only very, very briefly, and didn't remember her particularly, and also knew that we weren't allowed to talk about her. But her understanding was that Auntie Ivy had brain tumours.
Right.
That's what they were told. But you see, that then leads me to think, well, if she did, then why didn't the family kind of make excuses for her rather than just condemn her to we don't talk about her? Because if she was genuinely ill...
Yeah. That is very
So that's my great Auntie Ivy, who... from a gift that keeps on giving perspective, is just every time I go and look at the newspapers, I find another alias and another story about her conning people. So she was a character, a real character, but possibly misunderstood because she wasn't well.
Yeah, she certainly had ideas of where she wanted to be. And she certainly, when she had an idea, she found a plan and attempted to get there. And so you have to give her some credit for wanting to do that, albeit via criminal methods, but or maybe not acceptable behaviour, perhaps, but at the time. So yeah, she sounds like a fascinating person. When she dies, have you managed to find a will for her?
No, she did. Well, it was an accidental death, so I'm guessing it wasn't something that she was expecting to happen, if you like. It was out of the blue, so there's no probate for her. There's no will. And I think she had a very sad life, to be honest, because I don't think there was anybody Her family disowned her, clearly. All the people that were in her life were either somebody that she was working with or somebody she was conning. So I suspect she was a very, very lonely lady, actually. And so I'm torn. I'm fascinated by her, and the sort of the genealogical curiosity that we all have is really piqued by what's going on. It's fascinating to learn about what she got up to. But on the other hand, there were victims, and so it shouldn't really be something to celebrate. But I suspect she had a very, very lonely life. She clearly thought she should have more than what she actually had. She, thought somehow she was entitled to live a better life than the one she'd got. But rather than try and work for it, she tried to take it from other people.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for sharing the story of Auntie Ivy. But I think it's now time for you to face the brick wall. A problem shared is a problem halved. That's the old saying. And when it comes to dealing with those pesky brick walls, it's absolutely true. I hate it when my research has to halt for days, months, even years. But I love those eureka moments when my brick wall becomes brick dust. Yes, it's now time for my guest to share one of their brick walls in a hope that one of you, dear listeners, can help with a clue or research idea that might bring it tumbling down. So, Kathy, how can we help?
Well, my brick wall is actually in my husband's family.
Okay.
And he is called John Wilshaw. My husband's called John Wilshaw. And the John Wilshaw that is my brick wall is his 3 times great-grandfather. And there's a lot of John Wilshaws in the family line. It's a family name. So and as I'm explaining it, I will get a little bit lost sometimes with whether it's senior, junior, or some other John Wilshaw I'm trying to explain to you. I'll do my best. So he's the 3 times great grandfather, and he's, if you like, my longest serving brick wall, because as we talked about earlier, one of the graveyards that I wandered around was in Staffordshire. So when John and I first got married, he's not remotely interested in family history, and that's fine because it gives me an extra family to research. So I don't mind that. That's fine.
Leaves it all to you. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm dead lucky because I've got my biological family, my adoptive family, and his family. So this is great. I've got so many to research. But John Wilshaw, his 3 times great-grandfather, is the one that has been a brick wall for the longest, because he is one of the first that I stumbled at. Now, as I say, you'd think John Wilshaw is a fairly unusual name. And it is until you go to Staffordshire, and then you trip over them all over the place. So the first time we went to Staffordshire, I'm Kathleen Wilshaw, and we'd not long been married, and my credit card was in the name Kathleen Wilshaw. And I went into Leek, Tourist Information Bureau, because this was to get some maps so I could find churches to wander around.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Went to pay, and the lady on the other side of the tourist information desk said, "Oh, that's my name." And she too was a Kathleen Wilshaw. I was like, don't be ridiculous. And she said, "Yeah, you'll find a lot of Wilshaws around here. There's a lot." And there are. So it's all around sort of Leek and Stoke-on-Trent area of Staffordshire that my John Wilshaw is a problem.
Okay.
He was born, allegedly, in around 1803, 4, 5, something like that. And I know a bit about him from, he was married twice and had a child called John, just helpfully, and he died in 1854. And I know all of that. I've written a timeline for him because that was the only way I was going to make sense of what evidence I got and try and weigh up the evidence. Yep. And all of it points to him being born around about 1804-ish, 3-ish, 4-ish, 5-ish, and allegedly in Cheddleton. But can I find him? No, I can't. So if I just quickly tell you about John. He first appears fully formed in 1829 in a marriage register in Hanley in Staffordshire, where he married his first wife, Edith Stevenson. They didn't have any children as far as I can tell. Edith died 10 years later in North Staffordshire, and she is buried in the churchyard at Bucknell-cum-Bagnall, so Bagnall St Chad it is, and she's actually buried with John, even though he went on and married again. He is buried with his first wife. So then, in 1840, our John, now widowed for about a year, married his second wife, Elizabeth Mycock, and he married her in Leek, and he was said to be of Thorny Edge, which was an area sort of just south of there. And I know where that is, and I've absolutely no doubt that he was there for reasons that I'll explain in a moment. He was a labourer. They had a son, John, the following year, who was baptised in Bagnall. And at this point, our brick wall John was a farmer of Thorny Edge. And just a couple of months later is the census in 1841. And at Bagnall, Thorny Edge, there's our John, recorded as an ag lab rather than a farmer, but that's fine.
Okay.
And born in county, so that's good, that's helpful. And age 30, but as we all know, ages were rounded down. So that means he was aged somewhere between 30 and 35. Now, in 1848, he wrote his will, and he was said to be off Thorny Edge and a farming bailiff. So this is all adding up. This is the right person.
Okay, yeah.
1851 census comes along, and he's still at Bagnall, still at Thorny Edge, aged 46, which is nice and specific, and a farmer of 25 acres, which coincidentally is about the size of Thorny Edge Farm, so that's rather good. And it says he was born in Cheddleton. So again, this is all nice information. Later that year, 1851, Thorny Edge went up for sale, and it also included the sale, which was it was a property, Thorny Edge, owned by John Wilshaw. So we're all very, very happy this is all the right family.
Sounds good.
And It included, interestingly, a 5-seat pew at Bagnall Church. So I'm thinking, right, good, we're not dealing with nonconformists. We're probably dealing with Church of England churchgoers here, and we've got lots of connections to Bagnall and Thorny Edge. The sale, I don't know when it went through because it was advertised again the following year in 1852, but all the same information. So presumably it was sold not long after that. And then in 1854, our John died. Now he died, it was tragic. He committed suicide. He shot himself. This meant that there was an inquest, but it didn't really tell us anything. It just said he was, well, insane. That's it, really. And that he'd already tried to commit suicide a few years earlier. He, by this point, was living in Horton, which is not Thorny Edge, so he'd clearly sold the place and moved away. Yeah. He was with his wife, with his child, and he was aged 50. He's buried at Bagnall Church, as I say, with his first wife rather than his second wife when she died later on. So I don't know why that was, but that was rather good because it meant for absolute certainty I knew that that was his first wife, Edith, because her name's on there, her date of death, and it says first wife of John Wilshaw, and it's got his date of death of Horton. So there's no question I've got the right family. So there are clues in that. They all point to him having been born around about, well, actually the 1841 census implies he was born a bit later, 1806 to 1811, but the 1851 census and his death suggest he was born around 1804, 1805, so sort of, not massively different. Oh, there's one other thing I should say, and that's that John Wilshaw was, our brick wall John, was the son of John Wilshaw according to his marriage certificate. So luckily when he married in 1840, the second marriage, it says son of John Wilshaw, who was also a farmer. So John, another John, great. But I went onto a website, a genealogical website, which I won't name, to see if I could find any clues, if anybody else was researching the same family, and if they knew anything. Okay. And I found that people have 2 different baptisms for the John that I'm looking for. So they think they've got him. So I thought, well, I'll investigate this, because there's one in Cheddleton in 1803, and you think, it's John, son of John, born 1803. It is him. It isn't him. And I know this because I went to Cheddleton churchyard and I looked at the gravestone of the family. Again, it's online now because of Find a Grave, but in those days it wasn't. And that John died in 1804 and is on his family's gravestone. So it's really not him. So the obvious one, it can't be. Then a lot of them have also got down that he could be the son of John Wilshaw and Mary Parr, who'd married in 1800 in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm quite happy with that. And they'd baptised some children in Bagnall in the early 1800s. I thought, well, this is them. This has got to be them.
Yeah, sounds feasible.
However, there is no baptism of a John Wilshaw at the right time to this couple. There's one in Newcastle-under-Lyme, but that turns out to be a completely different family who I've traced. And the second problem is that I then traced forward John Wilshaw Senior. So the one, John Wilshaw who married Mary Parr, who were people have down as the parents. I traced them to see what happened to them. And that John Wilshaw was a tailor. And our John Wilshaw, his father was a farmer.
Can't be him.
Yeah, and our John Wilshaw's father was a farmer allegedly in 1840 when he got married, whereas this other John Wilshaw was a tailor on the 1841 and 51 censuses.
Okay.
So it's quite a consistent tailor. He didn't suddenly go from farming to tailoring and back again. He's a tailor. And then John Wilshaw, who married Mary Parr and was a tailor, also died in 1840. And he died before our John got married. So our John, you would have thought, would have put John Wilshaw deceased as his father, or John Wilshaw Taylor deceased or something. I mean, I know it's not 100% and people absolutely not consistent. But when John Wilshaw, the tailor, died, his death was registered, because I got his certificate just to see if there's anything on it. His death was registered by John Wilshaw, who lived in Church Street, Newcastle under Lyme. And that John Wilshaw was also a tailor and would, I suspect, have been the son who was of John Wilshaw and Mary Parr. It is absolutely not that family. And where I'm stuck now is I found an 1803 baptism in a place called Worslow for a John, son of John and Anne. And I'm really, really drawn to this because I can't find anything more about John, son of John and Anne. So it could be. But Worslow is not that close to Cheddleton. So did he perhaps just grow up in Cheddleton and think that's where he was from? Because that, in those days, that wouldn't be unusual. So I have no local knowledge of Staffordshire. I've got no local knowledge of whether, everybody left Worslow and went to Cheddleton because of the tin mines. I mean, I've got nothing. And because it's not my direct family, of course, much as I love my husband, I know he's not interested. So I put John Wilshaw, 3 times great-grandfather, to one side to concentrate on things that I was interested in. And when we started talking about doing this podcast, I thought, you know what? Actually, John is my real brick wall. He's the one I would love to know where he came from, because nobody springs fully formed into this world aged 26. They just don't. So where did he come from? Who was he? Who's his family?
Wow. Well, there we go, listeners. There's your challenge. Can you find the right John Wilshaw? Kathy, what's the best way for listeners to make contact if they think that they have a clue or a research idea?
Well, I have a website, which is kathywilshaw.co.uk, and there's a contact form on that, so you can contact me through that, or you can email me directly at kathy@kathywilshaw.co.uk, and I would be delighted for any clues that you could offer me about John, son of John, son of John. You know, that would be amazing. And father and grandfather of John. I'd love to know where he came from, please. Thank you.
Of course, listeners can also head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com, where they can read this episode's show notes and send us a message, or they can just email us at hello@familyhistoriespodcast.com, and we'll pass that message along to Kathy. I don't know Staffordshire either, so hopefully someone else does, and someone out there has got an idea. So while the listeners put their thinking caps on in a bid to solve this one, I've got a gut feeling that I can help you with this, but you'll need to follow me through to the garage.
This is so exciting, I can't tell you. It's not as well organised as my husband's garage.
Oh, well, to be fair, Kathy, your husband probably doesn't have a secret time machine in his.
What? No, you're having a laugh.
Not at all. This is a finely tuned, highly calibrated piece of scientific equipment.
Even this bit? I think I had one of these as a child.
Make do and mend. Anyway, this machine can help solve some of the toughest brick walls ever known. Although still no idea what happened to my evil 4 times great-grandmother, but I digress. I wondered whether you'd like to take a trip back in time as a sort of, thank you for being on today's episode. Maybe you could go and have a chat with a load of John Wilshaws.
That would be incredible.
Well, if you grab a seat over there, yes, that's it, then I'll get everything set up.
Can I only pick just one date?
I'm afraid so, but it's up to you to choose when and where would be the best chance for you to solve that brick wall.
Do you know what? I'd like to go and talk to Ivy.
Oh.
That's what I'd really like to do, and see what motivated her.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I think Sunday, the 1st of July, 1934, and I'd like to go to Windsor in Berkshire, please.
Okay, well, let me get that set up for you.
Andrew, does it ever go wrong?
Wrong? Oh, no. Well, not properly wrong. That's rare anyway. But you will need this.
What's this?
It's a temporal beacon. Keep it with you at all times and don't let anyone see it. And when you're ready to come home, just tap the big button on the top and you'll be right back here.
What, this one?
Nope, that's the pepper spray. Yes, that one.
Okay, I've got it.
Perfect. Right, here we go. Kathy Wilshaw, thank you, goodbye, and good luck. 1934, Clarence Road, Windsor. Fantastic. About time it worked. The Family Histories podcast was presented and produced by me, Andrew Martin. My guest was the brilliant Kathy Wilshaw, and if you've enjoyed this episode, then why not tell all your friends? And if you haven't, then tell all your enemies. I don't mind. Thank you for listening. Approximately no family historians were harmed in the making of this podcast.